So you guys know my internet is down, so I'm gonna have to do this a little different than usual. No, I'll show you. Actually, I don't want to show you now. I want to show you in advance some of these things. I want to ask for some input from you. Then I'll show you the slide fills in. You can copy it down.
Wait, what?
So we are on. Flip ahead. We're past the keys. We are on the slide that talks about the 6 kingdoms.
I was monsters.
All right. So we're moving into sort of another. Guys, we're moving into another section of our unit. So we've talked about what taxonomy is. We talked about species and hybrids and scientific names and how to identify unknown species using a dichotomous key. So where we're going to go next is we're going to start to talk about the different types of living things, how they're classified, what their main characteristics are. And we're going to take a while to do this. We're going to go through each of the kingdoms. We'll talk about different phylums in certain groups, different orders and classes and other groups. So we're going to get pretty detailed here. But to start off, what's our top level of taxonomic classification? Domain. Every living thing is in one of 3 domains. We'll talk about that in a little bit. What's below domain? Kingdom. All living organisms on Earth are in one of just 6 kingdoms. And so we're going to name them. Probably some you're familiar with, some you are not. So let's start in the lower right-hand corner. Not sure why the guy's not wearing any clothes. Feel free to try out some shorts on him or something.
I don't have that page.
So what kingdom are we looking at in the bottom right of that page, of that slide? Yeah, obviously that is the animal kingdom. Going clockwise now. Bottom left. Raise your hand, please. Bottom left, what's that group? Cassia?
The plant kingdom.
Plant kingdom.
That is the vegetable.
Moving up, top, middle left. Which kingdom would that be called?
The fungi.
Those are fungi. Now we start to get into what might be some unfamiliar territory. The top middle. Sean? It's a good guess, but it's not. These are other single-celled organisms. Bacteria are single-celled. These are also single-celled. But these are more complex single-celled organisms.
Viruses.
No?
Amoeba.
That is an amoeba. So the top, the one on the top right is an amoeba. The one on the top left is a paramecium. The one below that's a euglena. All of these are protists.
That's what I said.
And then if we move over to the right middle, we sort of combined 2 kingdoms together. And those 2 kingdoms are called bacteria and archaea.
Wait, so what's the kingdom?
Bacteria and archaea. I gotta. All right. So, how do we place different organisms in these kingdoms? Well, it's based on really not that many characteristics. Organisms are placed in the different kingdoms based on 3 or 4 main factors. Okay, and that's what we'll talk about next.
Okay, there are so many more animals than
All right. So, first of all,
Oh wow.
one really important dividing line between the various kingdoms are the complexity of their cells. When we talk about cells in our cell unit, we sort of said, oh, here's plant cells, here are animal cells, here are the parts they have. But that was simplifying things quite a bit. Things are more complicated than that. There are some living organisms that inside of the cell, they don't have any organelles. They don't have a nucleus. They don't have mitochondria. They don't have chloroplasts. These are very, very simple cells, and they're typically very small cells. So the word we have for those simple, very small cells without any nucleus, they're called prokaryotes. Simple cells with no nucleus. They still have DNA, but that DNA is just kind of spread throughout the cytoplasm. It's not held within a nucleus. Prokaryotes were the first organisms on Earth to evolve. They're very simple. Bacteria and archaea are both prokaryotes. The words come from these roots and prefixes. Pro means before, like the prologue of a book is a little section before the main part of the book begins. Karyo, this root means having to do with a nucleus. So prokaryote literally means before nucleus. These are cells that don't have a nucleus. This prefix "eu" means like true. Eukaryotes have a true nucleus. They're more complex cells. Typically they're larger. They do have a nucleus. They do have other membrane-bound organelles inside of them. So we split our groups, our domains and kingdoms, depending on whether or not they're prokaryotes or eukaryotes. Another factor we consider when we're putting things into kingdoms is the number of cells that organisms are made out of. There's sort of just two options here. Organisms are either unicellular or multicellular. And I'm sure you can guess what those words mean. Unicellular means they're single-celled organisms. One cell is a whole entire living thing. We are not unicellular, we are multicellular. A living organism in the animal kingdom is made of many cells all working together to form the entire organism. All right, let's see.
Wow. Oops. Genius. That's how I would describe our class in one sentence. Just something falls over. Wow. Oh, oops.
All right. The other factor that comes into play is nutrition. We talked about this in our question of the day. Some types of organisms can use the sun's energy to make their own food, autotrophs. Other organisms need to consume other organisms to get food. So that's another important factor we look at. So we can talk about each of the kingdoms now and sort of go through their main characteristics in regards to these three things. There's some other factors we look at as well, and we'll talk about that in the next couple slides. So let's start with probably the kingdom you're most familiar with, the animal kingdom. And let's think about these three criteria. So first of all, the cells in the animal kingdom. Raise your hand if you can tell me. You think they are prokaryotes or eukaryotes? Ashley? They're eukaryotes. Here's a way to help you remember. Pro rhymes with no. Prokaryotes have no nucleus. Eu rhymes with do. Eukaryotes do have a nucleus. So yeah, animal cells, as we studied in our unit, they have a nucleus and other organelles. What about their number of cells? Are they unicellular or multicellular? Check. Multicellular. How about their nutrition? Are they autotrophs or are they heterotrophs? They're heterotrophs. Animals have to eat other organisms in order to obtain energy. Oh, all right. I don't really want to show you plants. I want to spoil the surprise. All right. So the animal kingdom, multicellular, eukaryotic, heterotrophic. It's also the largest kingdom of identified species. Now, that's not necessarily because there's the most number of animal species. It's probably because they're large, we can see them easily and identify them. And examples of animals go from some things you probably don't even think are animals. A sponge, a worm, an insect, a jellyfish, a cat, a person. These are all examples of animals. How about plants? Let's do the same. So, prokaryote or eukaryote? Eukaryote. They have a nucleus, they have chloroplasts, other organelles. Are they, raise your hand please, unicellular or multicellular? Abby?
Multicellular.
Multicellular. Are they autotrophs or heterotrophs? Ella? Autotrophs. Another characteristic is that they have a cell wall around the outside. We'll mention that for a bunch of these species. They also have a cell wall. So plants include things like algae, grasses, corn plant, flowers, trees.
What is like a Venus flytrap classified
Still an
as?
autotroph. We'll talk about that when we get to our plant unit, and I'll explain why that's the case. All right, now we start to get to things that are maybe not as familiar. Fungi. So what are examples of fungi? Mushrooms,
Truffles.
slime molds, truffles, also molds, yeast. Okay? And so fungi are both unicellular and multicellular. Some, like yeast, are unicellular, but many are multicellular as well, like mushrooms. Okay. So they are both uni and multicellular. They are also eukaryotes. They have complex cells. They're heterotrophs. What do they eat? What is a mushroom? Sometimes people get confused. They think it's like a plant, but it's not like a plant. What does a mushroom eat? I said a heterotroph has to eat other organisms. Elizabeth? Yeah, like what? Like what does a mushroom eat? Sean?
Like things that it grows on.
Yeah, it basically digests dead, decaying organic matter in the soil. For example, in front of our house, we had a place where we had a tree. We had to take it down because it was dying. And every spring now, in that same area where the tree was, a big patch of mushrooms comes up every spring when the rain starts. That's because those mushrooms are growing in the soil. They are digesting the remaining roots of that tree, breaking them down. That's what they're using for nutrition. Okay, if you see a mushroom growing out of the side of a tree or on a rotted log, it's basically breaking down that dead tree or that rotted log and absorbing the nutrients. So they're eating the tree. They also have a cell wall, but it's a different type of cell wall than a plant. It's made out of a different material. What were plant cell walls made out of? Cellulose. Chitin is what fungi cell walls are made out of. Okay, so we have plants, animals, fungi. Next up, Protists. Protists is a weird group. Protists was actually a group that taxonomists used to just put things that don't really fit anywhere else. So first of all, the protists are unicellular. They're single-celled organisms, but they're still eukaryotes. They have complex cells. Some protists are heterotrophs, some are autotrophs, some can actually do both in the same organism. And so you've probably heard of an amoeba before, maybe a paramecium. And we're going to talk more about these as we move through our unit, but we'll look at these three protists in the microscope. We'll see living examples of them. This is the amoeba, this is the euglena, this is the
Oh,
paramecium.
that looks like a fish. Is that an eye? Come on.
Looks like a.
All right, then we get down to the two kingdoms that you're probably least familiar with, bacteria and archaea. So bacteria and archaea are very small, very simple cells compared to the other groups we have. So what do you think that means about them?
Unicellular.
They're unicellular and
Autotroph.
not always.
They're both
What's the other term we're looking at?
Prokaryote.
Prokaryotes. So both bacteria and archaea are unicellular. They're both prokaryotes. Bacteria can be auto or heterotrophic, depending on the type of bacteria.
Ooh, E. coli.
Archaea is also unicellular, prokaryotic, but autotrophic. So bacteria are all around. They live inside of us. They live on us. Many of them are beneficial to us, help us in our digestion and so forth. Others can be dangerous. Others can cause disease and illness. So not all bacteria are bad. Some examples, E. coli. There are many types of E. coli. Many of them live in our digestive tract and are helpful to us.
Really?
Other types can cause food poisoning. Salmonella
Yeah. Eggs.
is one that causes food poisoning. Streptococcus is a type of bacteria. That is what causes strep throat. Okay? Cyanobacteria are autotrophic bacteria that make their own food. Now archaea is interesting. This was a kingdom that scientists discovered relatively recently. And archaea was this type of organism that scientists discovered living in quite extreme conditions. Sometimes archaea are called extremophiles, meaning they can live in conditions that are extremely hot or extremely cold, extremely salty, extremely acidic or basic. So scientists thought, for example, you would never find living organisms inside of these vents, these geysers. But actually when they look more closely there, they'll find these unique types of living things that actually can survive in those conditions. And since discovering this group of organisms, they found them in many other places as well. So some that live in extreme temperature conditions are called
Excuse the
thermophiles.
interruption, Javante McCorkle. If you're in the building, please come to the office.
Some that can live in extremely acidic conditions are called acidophiles. So they're named sometimes based on what role they play. Yes?
Do these like live at the bottom of the ocean?
Yeah, some in like deep sea
thermal
vents.
Yeah.
Yeah, some do live there.
They drink space juice.
I don't know, space juice, what?
Juice.
All right, any questions about our kingdoms or examples? Tomorrow we'll do a little bit more and we'll have a chance to review because Friday is quiz day.
Oh.
And also your fish lab, be sure to double check your answers and hand in tomorrow if you did not already do so.
Yeah, Shauna.
I was almost gonna look at my brother's old lab. You were what? I was gonna look at my brother's old lab. He was just like, but I did.
Yes.
Can I bring this home?
Yep. Yep, you can bring home and like that.